morning. My guest on my family pod this morning is Jonathan Edgeley from the Montrose Health Group. So welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much indeed for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
No, thank you very much for coming. The topic this morning on our podcast is the issue of addiction in relationships and how they can impact relationships. And I, as a divorce lawyer, from time to time, come across issues with that people have with all sorts of substances like alcohol, drugs, gambling, prostitution, sex, all sorts of issues. And they can fracture relationships and cause all sorts of dynamics within the relationship. For example, the person who isn't the addict may become more of a caregiver and parent to the person who's the addict. And sometimes if the addiction is so bad that the addict's unable to function or to work, the other person ends up working more, becoming more of a money earner and looking after the house, looking after the children. And it creates great conflict in relationships. And the impact that has on children of having a parent who's an addict can be very damaging. And so I was really interested to hear about the work that you do at Montrose Health Group and the support that you provide for addicts, because I think that we live in a society now where we normalise alcohol in particular and drug use maybe, and we have bottomless brunches and bars are open all day, and greater acceptance of overindulging. And it's very difficult once you've started in drinking a lot or taking cocaine or cannabis and think, well, everyone else is doing it. It's fine. It's not really impacting upon me. But I'd be really interested to learn about your experience personally with addiction, Jonathan, and the help that you can provide addicts at the facilities that you have at Montrose.
Sure, absolutely. And I think you've touched on some really important areas there. And in the work that you do, I'm quite sure that you do see a lot of complex family dynamic, and we'll see a lot of dependency towards substances or behaviours, as well as full-blown addiction. I think it's important to say that, you know, some people can drink and use drugs in a social setting, but may do more so than others. That is a slightly different presentation to somebody who is experiencing full-blown dependency on alcohol, for example, or prescription medication. So there are various presentations, and in the complexity of those different presentations is there's some movement there from the fully dependent individual who can rely on the social experiences that they have as a veil to show some level of normality in how they do what they do and how they present, and minimization around their own mental health and illness.
So somebody who's dependent on alcohol can function with a job and other aspects of their life, but an addict might not be able to. Is that the...
Quite possibly. I mean, it's really interesting. So, you know, for transparency, I'm in recovery from addiction myself, and I've lived in active addiction. And during that time, I was holding down a job. I was going to a job, and I was able to operate on a certain level. I was in the IT and tech industry, and I was working as a sales and business development manager with varying levels of success. But what happened was, as my addiction progressed, my attention to detail and my interest in the work reduced dramatically. So therefore, exposing more of my behaviors to the people that I was working for at the time, where there became an increased concern. So addiction develops and grows over time. We don't start drinking and become addicted straight away. It's a progressive illness. So where things start off with fun, socialization, can over time lead to isolation, drinking alone or using drugs alone, with as a minimal amount of social interaction as possible, because it has an impact on how I wanted to drink, for example, or how I wanted to use drugs. Okay. They weren't for sharing at that point. It was a party for one. So yes, my addiction did impact hugely on my work, but at the same time, I was able to mask it to a degree under the guise of high performing sales and marketing person who delivers the number at the end of the month. So if I'm able to deliver something that I'm asked to deliver, therein lies the get out of jail free card, because I'm performing, even though I don't feel great and I'm showing up late and I didn't get to bed till 7 o'clock in the morning and I'm in a sales meeting at 8 o'clock, I can still show up suited and booted and be able to represent myself in a way that I felt was appropriate, although probably not, looking back.
Yeah. And there's a lot of secrecy that goes around addictive behaviours, isn't there, in terms of not admitting to yourself that you have a problem and sort of masking what you do by hiding bottles.
There's a lot of that. I think like I said, at the beginning, my journey and other people's journeys that I see and I work with is that where it started is certainly not where it ended up. So what I know is that I didn't wake up an alcoholic, and I didn't wake up one morning thinking I want to be an alcoholic because that seems like a good idea and a good choice and a good career move. It's got a lot of prospects being an alcoholic, because it hasn't. So that wasn't a default position. So I didn't choose it. It chose me. And I didn't know what I had. I thought I was just up for fun, last man standing and enjoying the party. And this is just how life was. That coupled with some challenging family stuff that went on in my early childhood with my parents getting divorced. That was difficult.
Yeah.
And I think...
How old were you when your parents...
So I was 13, 14 when my parents first separated. And that had a really significant impact on me and my younger brother, who was 10, 11. My mother, God bless her, was an alcoholic. So with my father leaving, I was left in the house, I believe to be the man of the house at that point.
Yeah, it's a lot.
And, responsible also for my alcoholic mother, which was difficult because I didn't want to express vulnerability in those situations and ask for help. I didn't know how to do that. So what I did was man up and deal with life as I best saw fit without any real intervention or guidance from adults.
Because people didn't know that your mother was an alcoholic? Or...
I think people did know my mother was an alcoholic, or certainly had issues with alcohol, but it wasn't addressed and it certainly wasn't spoken about because it was taboo. So much stigma associated with alcoholism addiction, as there is still today. We're talking about it today. I'm happy talking and sharing my experience around it and what recovery is. But at the same time, a lot of people still do not want to, or will come into our clinic under the guise of general mental health, anxiety, particularly low mood, poor sleep, but they're not always presenting as, I think I've got an addiction to cocaine or I've got an addiction to alcohol and I need some help. That comes later.
Because I think some people may just think, well, I need to have alcohol in order to sleep at night. If I don't have the alcohol, I'm not going to sleep. But in fact, it's a vicious cycle, isn't it?
But true.
Yeah.
If I'd been out on a bender and I'd done 1 night, 2 nights out, and I didn't have any alcohol, trying to get to sleep was difficult. And I'd always had a very poor night's sleep. So my mentality was, well, if I drink, I sleep better. It's amazing. It's a very cunning, baffling and powerful illness that tells me every day I don't have it. So we can quite quickly write in our mind what we think is the right thing to do. And we can justify and rationalize poor behavior, poor decision making, because it benefits us and suits us. So we have to be really careful about that. So a lot of people, when they come to us because they don't really know what's going on. So it's not necessarily denial. It's just a not knowing what is actually happening. Yes, I'm drinking too much, but why are you drinking too much? That's the question.
Yes.
What is it that's going on in your system that is prompting you to drink alcohol to excess every single day? And often we track it back to a traumatic situation.
Yeah.
Which often adverse childhood experience in early life where something has happened that hasn't been discussed and actually it hasn't been healed. So it's like having a gaping wound open, without anything to help it on the healing journey.
So do you think your own problem with addiction started with seeing your mother struggling with a relationship with alcohol?
I think it's a very interesting question. And I was thinking about that, funnily enough, on the way over here this morning. I think I'm genetically predisposed to addiction. If I look at my mother's side of the family and also on my father's side to some degree, there is absolutely addiction there. My mother died nearly 10 years ago now from addiction. Her sister died, cousin died. So I think with that information, the likelihood of it happening within the family is great. I think also that was a catalyst, but it was quite interesting really, Jane, because I used to say to myself, I'm never going to be like my mum, or I'm never going to be like these other people that I used to see drinking and smoking all the time. Stuff is so unhealthy. I'm never going to be like that. And lo and behold, 13, I'm snaffling drinks out of the cupboard in the corner and going out to the park with my friends and getting drunk. And experiencing a euphoric high and realizing that actually this substance in this bottle neutralizes all my negative thoughts, makes me feel good, makes me happy, sociable, I'm engaged, and I'm comfortable in my own skin for the first time.
So what made you confront your addiction and do something to change it?
So it wasn't until probably my late 20s I started to consider counselling and therapy. I also lost my driving licence as I was caught drink driving, although I didn't suspect I was over the limit at this point. Of course I didn't. So I lost my licence and then I lost my job. So in that happening, there was an exposure. So people could see for the first time really that the problem was probably greater than anybody wished to acknowledge, particularly me. So I started seeking some drug counselling services, which, my father suggested I did. And so I started to do some of that reluctantly just to keep people off my back.
Yes.
I wasn't going there in order to find a solution to my drinking and drug taking problem. I was going there to get people off my back. That was the solution. That didn't work. My life continued to spiral, just became smaller and smaller and smaller. And it got to a point where my father came around one morning and we had a blazing row. And then the next day he met me and said, look, I'm really worried about you. I think you've got an addiction. Went ballistic about, just did not agree with at all. And he said, I'm going to send you to rehab. I said, well, I don't think I need to do that. And he said, well, I think you do and you're going.
Yeah.
So that's what happened. And I ended up in a rehab in South Africa and I arrived there on New Year's Eve. Expecting champagne and fireworks. Got a bag search and a cup of Horlicks.
Is that the turning point for you?
It was a turning point.
Yeah.
It wasn't the ultimate turning point. It was my first surrender. I had no idea what to expect going into rehab. It was at the time Amy Winehouse was singing Rehab, and there was a part of it that was a little bit exciting and, talking about it with people prior to going. There was some bravado there, but getting there and experiencing was something very different. It was hard, it was difficult, but it was an incredibly life-changing experience. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to worry about brown envelopes arriving on my doorstep from the tax man. I didn't have to concern myself with the day-to-day humdrum of life. I didn't have to have a job. It was the first time in my life where I actually stopped and did some work on me, which was really difficult because I'd never done that before and I didn't know where to stop. Obviously, with guidance and counselling and things like that, you're taken through a process and a program. And I was with other people from all over the world who also had issues with addiction and mental health. So I stayed for 4 months. And as I said, I had a bit of a spiritual awakening there, came back to the UK, and there's a lot that happened in that time, but ultimately 4 years later, I picked up a drink again. And that led to me drinking for nearly 4 years again. And the whole world collapsed.
Yeah.
Everything came down again.
So it wasn't a linear recovery?
Not at all. No.
Mm.
You see, in the first 12 months, 75% of people who've been through treatment or have stopped drinking will relapse.
Okay. It's a high proportion.
It is a high proportion because the illness can only be arrested, it lays dormant. It's not something that you can switch off. With chemotherapy, for example, it lays dormant and it will come back, and it will come back more aggressively than it does the first time. We're lulled into a false sense of security around addiction. We think, oh, we've been in rehab, or they've been in a detox. They're getting recovery service. They're going to be fine now. when actually it's not the case. The work that needs to happen. So the alcohol, the drugs, they are but a symptom of the addiction. They are not the addiction. The addiction lives between my ears. The addiction lives in me. Okay? So it's not the booze, it's not the pills. They are the solution to addiction. So what we need to do is swap that solution for a healthier solution. We talk about recovery. But what needs to happen is there needs to be, it's a bit like an onion, really. And recovery is very much like that, where you're peeling layers off as you go, as you're getting closer and closer and closer to the core. I don't go into rehab and day one, I'm able to, do full confessional and admit my innermost secrets and fears and concerns and trauma, because I'm petrified of doing that and showing vulnerabilities. That has to come in time when I'm building trust, I'm building rapport, and I'm finding things out with experts and professionals that are helping me unveil things that I didn't even know were there. That's what recovery is. So, unsurprisingly, 75%, although high, is something that happens very often because people don't necessarily do the work. And society thinks because you've been in rehab, you're fine now. Because you've stopped drinking, you're fine now. But it's a bit like somebody coming out of hospital who's just had a broken leg. You take the crutches off them, they're going to fall on the floor and hurt themselves again, aren't they?
Yeah. So what happened to the end of the 4 years when you were drinking and then you presumably stopped? What caused?
Well, one morning, and in that 4 years, by the way, I got married, had kids, set up a business. I had a child from my first relationship. So all of a sudden now I've got 4 kids, house, wife, business. But what had happened was I'd stopped doing the things that needed to be done in order for me to recover. We talk about recovery being on a day-at-a-time basis. And I'd stopped doing the things that I needed to do. And because of that, I got further away from the solution and closer to the problem. And then I started to fantasize about picking up a drink again and actually justifying it in my own mind that it would be okay this time. And I think I can handle it because I've spent 4 years not drinking. So if I've done it once, I can certainly do it again. And how wrong I was. My life, although for a couple of months, seemed to be drinking in a controlled environment and in a controlled way, avalanche came and it quickly became daily drinking, going to the pub every night after work, going home with a couple of bottles of wine. And that then became my go-to, and that became a real problem again. Yeah. But what happened was I woke up one morning and my wife had given me an ultimatum. She said to me, I've been to see a lawyer, everything's prepared, and if you don't stop, I will take the children and we'll leave you. And
so was that the catalyst for you to change?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was a strange experience, really, because I remember standing in the bedroom and her saying this to me. With every fibre of my being, I wanted to say, and I said, yes, okay. And that took me by surprise because it didn't feel like they were my words in a sense. And at midday that day, I'm in an AA meeting. And that was July the 18th, 2014. And I've not had a drink since.
Yeah. Fantastic.
But more importantly, I don't want to have a drink either,
No. But tell me more about what Montrose does in terms of providing help for addictions.
So Montrose was set up to provide tailored experience for people suffering with addictions, with mental health and other behavioural issues that are having an impact on their emotional state. And we set up initially to offer residential services for people in a very tranquil setting. So we're based over in Derbyshire in the Peak District National Park. And we work with one client at a time. And what I mean by that is a client comes into one of our cottages. They are provided with 24-hour staff. They have their own psychiatric team, psychological team, nursing team. And then we have a host of psychotherapists, coaches, meditation, mindfulness, yoga, PT, nutrition, where we take them on a journey of healing. Whether they're coming in with an addiction, where they are dependent on a substance and require medical intervention and detoxification, we can provide that. People coming in who've just got a problematic relationship with the substance, and or those people who are coming in that are on, and we do a lot of this work, who are on the back end of divorce and have just completely lost their sense of purpose and are unsure really what direction to take. and need to go through a process of psychological assessment and evaluation and some deep therapy and create some heart space for them to be able to really take a beat and understand what it is that they want to do next. And
Yeah, so it's not just addiction.
No.
Your facilities have provided help for people going, through divorce or some sort of crisis in their lives, whether it's to do with how their brain thinks or an event that's happened that they found very difficult to deal with,
absolutely.
such as a bereavement or relationship breakdown. Whilst we're on the sort of addiction theme, they come and stay with you for a residential period of time.
Yes.
And get intensive therapy there. How long would you have someone come to stay with you typically? Does it depend? And what happens afterwards in terms of support?
Good question.
Because you said, most people relapse, don't they, within the first 12 months?
They do. They do. But what we've done is we've designed a program that continues after their residential stay.
Yeah.
So somebody comes in, they will typically, depending on presentation, of course, and their need, if they've got very complex addiction and co-occurring mental health needs where we need to do medication reviews and assessments, detoxification, and really establish some roots in the ground, stability from a medication regime generally prescribed, then that person could be with us for anywhere up to 2 months. Whereas somebody's coming with an emotional situation where there may have been a bereavement or empty nest syndrome or something that doesn't require that real complex clinical intervention, they might come for a week, they might come for a couple of weeks. It really depends on their situation, presentation, and what they want to get out of it, what their motivation is. So we tailor it specifically to meet their needs at that point in time. We meet them where they are, keeping the care plan very dynamic. Often it changes over time because as people start to get more comfortable in their setting, they start sharing a little bit more, and then we can start to look at whether anything specifically needs to be done around trauma, for example, what that looks like. And then we can start to look at sort of the neurodiversity. I've got people coming now who have signs of autism or ADHD, particularly in later life, that have gone undiagnosed and have flown under the radar, particularly women who are at home with the children, focusing on their careers, and haven't been in an environment where they could necessarily have been seen as having ADHD because they're very busy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Multitasking.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. And we've done quite a few assessments for people over 40. Yeah. So what we then do after that residential period, it informs an aftercare plan, and that aftercare plan generally works for around 90 days thereafter. So support the transition back into life in family relationships. We can also bring the family in and do systemic family therapy work, bringing in the children, understanding where they are, understanding, the whole family system, really.
So you see the wider family group.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, what we're looking at doing is where we can is always reducing that relapse rate, whether it's relapse into a mental health, relapse into an emotional state, spiraling into an emotional state. Is, well, how do we do that? Well, if we're just treating one person and we're just going to then put them back into a family unit of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 other people, where it's complex and potentially dysfunctional with some toxic relationships and behaviors. We talked about enabling earlier and things like that. If we're not preparing the family for re-entry and upskilling them as well around, what it is that their loved one came in with and how to work with that and how to support them and also support their own needs and difficulties, that 75% relapse rate is going to remain the same. So what we're always looking at doing is how do we lower the bar? Continued therapy, systemic family therapy, education, support, and looking at that infrastructure and support network outside of residential.
Because it's interesting, isn't it? Like, I come across this in my work in terms of a person who'd come and complain about their partner's behaviour, which was destroying the relationship in their opinion. And they describe their life at home and the increased responsibilities that they have as a result of being with somebody who has an unhealthy relationship with alcohol, so that they can't function. And it's very, very difficult, but sometimes that enabling them to carry on is facilitating the continuation of the issue, isn't it? Because if they can't address it because it's just too difficult, or they feel like they can't change things, it's very difficult. And the only way they can do it is either just being very busy and concentrating on the children, on keeping the mortgage going, keeping the house clean, and not dealing with it is sort of facilitating the continuation of the issue. And sometimes people just have to say, put healthy boundaries in place and say enough. I'm walking out. You can't deal with this problem.
I think there are different situations, aren't
Yes,
there?
yes.
There are people that are able to say, strong people that are say, look, this isn't working anymore. Giving you ample opportunity to change.
Yeah.
It's now impacting me and the children, whether that's the father or the mother.
Yeah.
We've decided to step back and consider other options at this time. Which sounds quite cold, but they've got to look after themselves, and that's a very bounded way of doing it. You then have situations where the other partner is enabling them, even if they don't think they are. They're enabling their behavior by always softening the fall. Okay, never allowing that hard-hitting concrete moment, always softening the fall, covering for them, sorting out the bills, borrowing from family members, ensuring things get paid because it's a face saver socially and within the family. I don't want to admit that this is really going on in the way that it is. So I'm going to sort of enable your behavior, even though I hate it. And I don't even know I'm enabling it. It's not a word that I've come across before in this sense. And then you've got, on the other side of that, you've got the caretakers. You've got people who enjoy looking after somebody who's unwell.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because it gives them a sense of purpose. And due to their own vulnerabilities, they do not want to let go of this relationship, even though there may be domestic violence, there may be mental abuse, there is possibly difficulty in relationships with children, which plays out in school. But there is a deep codependency as well, which can come from both sides. So the alcoholic, the addict, becomes very codependent on their partner, and their partner becomes very codependent on them because cyclically they've become used to how they dance, how they do the move. Actually, it serves a purpose for both of them because of their own insecurities, their own feelings of inadequacy, low self-esteem, low self-worth.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So that there are.
So it's helpful, the work that you do with families in that setting at Montrose.
Absolutely. And I think that it's really important that we're having this conversation, because a lot of the work that I do is when I go in to meet with private client advisors and lawyers, family lawyers, is having conversations like this to upskill them and talk about these different situations and dynamics to allow them to see things through a slightly different lens. We talk about vulnerable clients, and there's a lot of talk about that, particularly in family law at the moment. And we wrote a guide with a firm down in London, and that was really to support family lawyers have an understanding of some of the resources that might be available that they could share with their vulnerable client, because they have to remember, look, I'm your lawyer, I'm not your therapist, and we're on the clock. And I need to be doing this work with you here. But clearly you've got some vulnerabilities here, and I need to just be able to give you some options rather than just saying, I'm going to signpost you to my therapist or a therapist. Now, that can come from a really good place, but it isn't always necessarily the right solution. So what we try and do is provide a level of education and knowledge and, as I say, upskilling, so people can start to make some informed decisions and provide option to a vulnerable client.
Yeah. And quite often I'll come across people who are devastated by divorce. It's not a nice process for most people, and they find the grief and the recovery process very, very difficult. So I was interested to learn at Montrose that you do help people who are struggling after divorce to find their sense of self and direction, because I know many people who are struggling to parent by themselves or live independently, especially if they're not working. They have a lot of fear around making ends meet post-divorce by themselves. So it's interesting about the work that you do there. So tell me about the work that you do, people who have ADHD and autism and things like that. Do people go on a residential program with you, or do you do more work in terms of medication and therapy off off-site, so to speak.
Sure. So the neurodiversity
Yes.
piece become much more prevalent in our work in the last 18 months. So what we were seeing is people coming in with stimulant addiction predominantly, although marijuana and alcohol, prescription meds to a degree, but people coming in with stimulant addictions that quite obviously, once we'd got them off the substances, there was a quite obvious presentation of ADHD. And typically in treatment settings, it is only the addiction that is dealt with. And due to the work that we do being on a one-to-one basis, it gives us time and space to do other things. So we started then to look at how we could assess and support somebody with ADHD, for example, and or autism, which has presented in some of our younger clients, really helping them to understand what is going on for them by bringing in the right specialists to be able to support them from a psychotherapeutic perspective and help them understand, well, what is ADHD? What is autism? How does it play out in their lives? And support them with things like executive functioning and how they can better navigate life with ADHD.
So you provide help for people who are sort of 13 years and over?
That's correct. We've just actually launched a new outpatient clinic.
Yeah.
And within that outpatient clinic, it's about the assessment and community treatment of neurodiversity and also addiction and general mental health. So for people who don't necessarily need to come into a residential, where we can bring them in, we can triage them, we can assess them, and then we can provide a care plan, which can include a lot of the things that we do in residential, but on an outpatient basis. Rather than just going down the prescribing route for medication, we're also looking at how that sort of holistic therapeutic practice can support them as well. Coaching, therapy, meditation, mindfulness practice, and really supporting them from an educational perspective, understand what it is that they have and how that can be harnessed in a very positive way, but also some practical tools that will support them in living life that serves them well and allows them to function in a neurotypical environment.
I think that's a great facility because it's so difficult to access help on the NHS sometimes, or there's a long waiting list, isn't there? So typically, what's a profile of a young person who might come to you? Are the parents coming to you for help because maybe their child's been excluded from school or has issues with cannabis or cocaine or non-attendance at school? I mean, what's the sort of profile of somebody who comes to you with ADHD?
So there's usually something has happened.
Yes, an event.
There's something that's happened, and maybe they've been suspended or excluded from school. Maybe they've been caught with something they shouldn't have been caught with. Maybe they've seen displays of heightened anxiety or problematic behaviors, really, isolation, and started, because ADHD, for example, everybody's talking about it. It's all over social media. So a lot of people are able to see videos and information of how ADHD may present. So people are coming to us now and saying, look, we've got a situation where this has happened and we're not sure what it is. We've been to the doctors and they think it may be ADHD, but there may be some substance misuse. And there's a waiting list of 3 or 4 or 5 years CAMS through the NHS, and we've decided to go private. So it's that situation. It's usually people who can afford to pay for a private assessment, although we do intend to go down the right to choose, which is where somebody can go to a GP and through their GP can get a referral into a private clinic and it's paid for through the NHS. So that's coming. But generally, it's for people whose parents have good visibility, relatively good visibility of their child or a loved one. So what we're able to do is provide psychiatric and psychological sort of assessment, formulation and understanding of what's going on and be able to provide recommendations.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic what you're doing, and it's a great facility for people. And
thank you.
And I hope it goes really well for you.
Me too.
Do you think you could be addicted to one substance and not another? Is that a misunderstanding on my part, or do you think it's just really dangerous if you're a person who can't just do things in moderation. Then anything is a bit tricky.
Well, it can be. I mean, in younger life, people like to explore and try things out, and trying out alcohol, trying out MDMA, trying out marijuana, amphetamine, some cocaine, and thinking, okay, well, I don't like that because that makes me drowsy. I don't like ketamine because if I have too much, this is what happens. Alcohol is quite good. And actually, have some cocaine with that and blimey, we were in a really good place. So people tend to find their substances and drugs of choice that suit their makeup. Some people like stimulants. Some people like downers. Some people like to be up and happy, and some people like to be down. But what's really interesting with ADHD, for example, people who are taking stimulants, cocaine, for example, can have a neutralizing and very relaxing effect on them, rather than experiencing a real high.
Yeah. So there must be lots of 30-year-olds, for example, knocking around who are maybe having issues with alcohol and drugs and go to work, are functioning, but that sort of drug taking, the alcohol, is having an impact on their health, although they may not realise it, and there's some anxiety or ADHD issues surrounding that. What would you say to people like that? I should imagine it's quite difficult once you've got a taste for binge drinking and taking cocaine at the weekend to sort of stop that lifestyle. You think, oh yes, okay, of course I'm going to try, but it must be quite difficult.
It is, but if you think of the happiness triangle,
okay,
and you won't be able to see this, but I'm drawing it for Jane. If you think about this is where we start, and this is where we finish. So the enjoyment factor and the fun factor is broad at the bottom
of the triangle,
but over time it becomes a lot smaller.
Yeah.
So for example,
the top.
Yeah. So for example, people who are drinking might now be drinking to blackout. People who are taking cocaine, the first line's great. Everyone thereafter is just full of paranoia. And what's happening there is I'm in a room on my own and I'm just looking through the curtains because I believe somebody's outside wanting to get in and harm me. Whereas right at the beginning, when I'm first into this, I'm out in a club and I'm dancing, I'm having fun and it's great. And I go home, I go to sleep, and I don't have any for a week. But when I get to this end, to the sharp end,
doing it on your
the triangle, it's a very different situation. The fun's gone out of it. And that's when, often people find themselves with limited options because we're starting to have some negative physical reactions. Okay, so we're now in my late 30s. I'm not functioning as well as I used to. My body hurts. My liver hurts. I'm having significant headaches. My nose really hurts. I'm struggling to breathe. There are clots coming down my nose. I think my septum's rotting. My skin's poor. I'm smoking too much. I'm not exercising. My heart feels like it's bouncing out my chest and I'm worried I'm having a heart attack. I'm having increased anxiety to the point where I can't really get out of the house. I'm phoning in sick. My job is going to rack and ruin. My relationship's closing down. And I am just disinterested and disassociated with anything that's positive in my world and in my life. But for some reason, I'm not able to ask for help.
Yeah. And how can you help these people?
So, in most cases, the referral pathway is from a loved one rather than the person themselves that needs the help. Probably 85% of our referrals come from a third party.
It's getting that person on board, I think, is probably the challenge.
It is.
And you intervening in that sort of situation.
Exactly right. So if they say, for example, I get a phone call from a mother and they're talking about their son, which is not unusual. And they say, I'm worried that he's got a cocaine addiction.
Yeah.
I've just sort of explained the situation along the lines that I've just shared. And I say, okay, are they open to help? No. But I'm at my wit's end and I don't know what to do.
Difficult, isn't it?
Well, it is difficult because you've got, a mother watching their son slowly die and feel completely helpless and possibly hopeless. And they're looking out and reaching out for help. Well, what can I do? And in those situations, it's not a case of, sorry, I can't help you, and until they pick up the phone and call me. It's the only time I'm going to be able to do anything. Is for us, this is an opportunity to potentially help somebody. So what we will always do is get as much information as we possibly can.
Yeah.
And then what we will try and do is instruct at very least a phone call with that person, because often the phone call is triggered by an event, as we've talked about a couple of times now. Is triggered by an event. Why are you ringing me? He's just lost his job, or he's just lost his driving license, or he was hospitalized with a suspected heart attack and it was anxiety. Something's happened.
Yeah.
So you're in the top end of the triangle where you've got a very limited time stamp here to say, right, we need to move quickly. So what state is he in now? Well, we've just got back from the hospital. Right, now I need to talk to him today, not tomorrow or the next day. I need to talk to him today. Yeah, he won't take your call. Right, well, I want you to take the phone, let him know you've spoken to me, let him know we're here to help, let him know who we are and what we do and how we operate. No judgment. We're just going to have a quick chat, keep it really cool, and just see where we're at. Okay. Have you spoken to him? Yes, I've spoken to him. Great. Is he open to a conversation? Not really, but he might. Right. Get on the phone now. Get it on loudspeaker. Walk in the room with it. Put it in front of him. I will talk to him.
Yeah.
So what we can do is we can start to try and facilitate conversations, because we want to help this person, and we will always be working towards that. Whether that's working towards them coming in, or whether that's working towards sharing them some resources, some free resources that they can access in the community and get help themselves, it doesn't really matter. Our primary purpose really as a service is to help somebody.
Yeah.
And that's what we'll always do. But we can sometimes facilitate situations like that where we can intervene. Some of them might be a little bit more planned interventions where the family are all bought into an intervention as such, where we work with the family and then we invite that person to a family meeting, and in a very methodical, well-planned way, we execute an intervention, which is where we go around the room and as mum, dad, brother, sister, we'll tell them how much we love them, but their addiction is really challenging, and we try and move them to a place of accepting help. So we try to move them out from a cognitive perspective into an emotional perspective, so that we travel from the head to the heart. We're trying to reach someone on an emotional level.
Yeah. Quite a powerful meeting.
Yeah. They are. Being in those situations and being in those where they're unplanned and we're bringing someone in and they don't know what's going on. Again, it can be at the beginning quite difficult to help somebody keep their seat for a period of time. But going through that process and somebody at the end of it saying, initially walked in the room and going, why are we here? I can't believe you're doing this to me. I hate you all.
Yeah.
To 20 minutes later, 30 minutes later, them saying, no, okay, let's go. Bags packed.
Interesting. Because quite often people come across as victims when they're addicts, that they don't accept that they have an issue and that it's everybody else's problem, not theirs. They have it under control. And sometimes they may even lose their job, but it's somebody else's fault that they've lost their job.
Always somebody else's fault.
And that there's partners being mean because he or she won't let them see the children because they're a good parent, and why is everyone against them? And there's a huge element of paranoia around it. It can be quite challenging as a lawyer working with somebody who has an addiction problem. And you'd think that losing your job and not being able to see your children every day would be enough sufficient triggers to make somebody sort of face their addiction, but sometimes very difficult.
You've got an impossible task there. In some ways, it's an impossible task. If you've got somebody in a situation where they're right in the middle of their addiction, they're going through a divorce, i.e. the other party has started the process and they're on the receiving end of it. It's a highly emotive time, isn't it? And that person is not accepting responsibility for it. And well, why did they want to divorce me? I can't believe they're doing this to me. They are horrible. And they've got it in for me, and they've got it wrong, and they're probably having an affair or this or that. So you're dealing with somebody that is extremely vulnerable, but is not accepting of the situation in any way, shape or form. And in those situations, it's about bringing some curiosity into your line of questioning, but also remembering that you're their lawyer, not their therapist. The dynamic can shift as people start to realise that their life isn't quite as they thought it was. So the reality of divorce is hard hitting and heavy. And once all of the rush of emotions start to drop, and that person's being exposed to the normality of people like yourself, Jane, and other people in the law firm and other people in society, start to think, hang on a minute, maybe I am quite different at the moment, and maybe I do need some help. And it's a great opportunity. It's not about, I think you're an alcoholic. It's, you are emotionally vulnerable at the moment, and you need some support. You need some scaffolding around you to just help rebuild you and just take you through this period of time with dignity and grace. So that's what I want to help you with, so I can do my job and represent you best, and you can represent yourself in the best way possible. So in order for us to do that, it's about helping you along that way, because we all need a bit of extra help from time to time, particularly in situations like this. So it's about going in a very sort of compassionate, calm way that isn't in any way naming or shaming or blaming. It's about going, listen, of course, this is very difficult. I understand how this might feel and how it's impacting you. I can see how you may feel that way. And then just leading them into a situation where, okay, well, this, okay, I agree. Actually, you need some extra help. I think you're probably right. What does that look like? Well, I'm going to introduce you to somebody who can possibly help you. Are you open to that conversation? Because that's all it's going to be.
That's really helpful to have that advice for you. And thank you very much for coming in, Jonathan. I think it was really interesting finding out about your own personal journey, and thank you for being so open about that. But I think it's great from that personal experience you've had that you're using it to help so many other people, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much indeed.
With Montrose.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Great to see you.